creative, they're committed. They have no regard in life, neither ours nor their own. I believe this was not an act of desperation, rather an act of asymmetric warfare waged against us.
I'm Pardiss Kebriaei. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights. And we represent two of the families of 3 men who died in Guantanamo in June of 2006. Those men, the 2 clients that we represent are Yasser Al-Zahrani and Salah Al-Salami. Yasser is from Saudi Arabia, Salah is from Yemen, and we represent them and their families in a civil case against 24 U.S. officials alleging torture, responsibility for the men's torture, for their arbitrary detention for 4 years between 2002 and 2006, and ultimately responsibility for their deaths in custody. The military in this case has always alleged that these men died as a result of suicide. They conducted a 2-year investigation and they came back with thousands of pages of documents supporting their conclusion that these men took their own lives. They came back the day after the deaths in June of 2006 and made a statement about how the men were found in their cells hanging from self-made nooses. They actually made a few comments about how the deaths were a good PR move, referred to them as asymmetric warfare. So our complaint against these officials is on the basis of the government's conclusions that these deaths were suicides, because essentially the only information we really have about what happened is in the custody of the U.S. government. Recently, what's come out as the result of the work by investigative journalists, including Scott Horton at Harper's, is that 4 soldiers who were stationed at the base at the time of the deaths have come forward publicly and said that in fact the official version of what happened is not what happened. And they've basically suggested that the men, the night that they allegedly died, they might have been taken from their cells to a secret site at Guantanamo that Scott Horton calls Camp No, and that they might have died as the result of events that took place there, or died later at a medical facility in Guantanamo. Those facts really underline the need for transparency and accountability for what happened. We've alleged that the U.S. military is responsible for these deaths regardless of how the men died, whether they were suicides or intentional murders. But these facts really emphasize the absolute need for transparency in this case. In terms of the law and accountability, these cases are really about whether people who've been detained at Guantanamo have the right to challenge the torture they've suffered, which we know has happened at Guantanamo, their detention, their wrongful detention on the basis of arbitrary designations of enemy combatant status, and then ultimately to hold Bush administration officials responsible for what happened. At the present time, under the Military Commissions Act, there is no such right for detainees to take cases like this to federal courts in the United States. And part of what we are trying to do in this case is challenge the constitutionality of that provision in the Military Commissions Act. The families want recognition, and they want the truth to come out. They have never believed that their sons took their own lives. They believe that there was something more that happened, and I think the testimony by the 4 soldiers who've come forward recently supports that maybe suicide is not actually what happened, but more than anything they want the truth told and they want acknowledgement of their loss. So this case is important for a lot of legal reasons, but most importantly for the families involved. One thing that I remember from the father of Yasser Al-Zahrani, whose name is Talal Al-Zahrani, who's based in Saudi Arabia, is that he talks a lot about how there's been absolutely no recognition of the loss that he suffered. He lost a son who was 17 at the time that he was taken to Guantanamo. That's his child. And the way he puts it is that, it's as if there was a car accident and someone died. He feels that actually there'd be more sympathy and more recognition if his son had died in a car accident than there has been for the fact that his son died in custody in Guantanamo, that the U.S. military didn't even have the decency to call the family and let them know of what happened. He had to find out on television from one of his family members who called and said, you know, did you see this report of the deaths in Guantanamo? And I heard your son's name mentioned. The government tried to dismiss the case, and recently the district court judge issued her opinion and basically found in favor of the government. So the case as it stands right now has been dismissed, not on the basis of the merits of the case, but on the basis of technical jurisdictional questions about whether the court has the power to hear the case. We're going to be pursuing the case, namely because the family wants it, and for as long as they want us pushing this case, and they are aware of the obstacles we're facing, they're aware that it's going to be a long road and very challenging, but as long as they want to pursue this, we will. We represent 2 of the men who've died. There have been 6 total who've died, and the government has investigated these deaths, there were 3, as I said, that happened in June of 2006. There are 3 others that have happened since then, and there's been virtually no investigation, or publicly released findings so far about any investigation into those deaths. So this is really part of just the secrecy around Guantanamo and the need for transparency and to know exactly what's happened there, particularly around these deaths. Following the deaths in 2006, there was one in 2007 that anecdotally we've heard from other detainees might have been the result of a beating by riot squads in Guantanamo called Emergency Reaction Forces. There's been no news, no information, no investigation about that person's death. There was a death following that in 2008 of an elderly Afghan man who died apparently as a result of getting no medical treatment for cancer, treatable cancer that he had. And then most recently, there was a death of a Yemeni just in 2009, of a Yemeni who died, possibly also, he was a long-term hunger striker. He might have died as a result of organ failure. There are various theories about what might have happened to him, but again, there's been no public information about what happened, and whether or not there's an investigation is unknown as well. But there needs to be transparency, and there needs to be investigation and public findings about what happened so that we can pursue accountability against officials who were responsible. There's been no change. There's been no change. The last person to have died in Guantanamo happened under Obama's watch. There's been no investigation publicly that's been reported that we're aware of. Very little information about what's happened, and if that person's family were to pursue a case in the courts, as we're trying to do, they would be subject to the same positions DOJ is taking in our case, which is that the court doesn't even have the power to hear the case. I think the public can do a lot in terms of pressing the Department of Justice right now to pursue investigations, a real investigation into what happened to these men, and to press forward, with respect to the allegations or the new information that's come forward from the soldiers who suggest that these men didn't commit suicide and that they were murdered. So there needs to be a full accounting and a full investigation, and the public can play a part in writing letters to Eric Holder and the Department of Justice pressing for an investigation.